Hello everyone. This video is for my critical thinking class. I wanted to take a moment this morning to record this video, just provide you guys a little update about the class and the things that we have going on this week. And I'll start with a little recap of last week. So last week we learned about becoming a critical thinker, and we had a nice discussion about the influence of authority on our critical thinking skills. In that discussion, we touched a little bit on the idea of utilitarianism, the sacrifice of some for the greater good. So we're getting into using a little bit more philosophy and really stretching our viewpoints on things in those discussions. I really appreciate all of your contributions to them. It was a great discussion, so thank you very much. This week, we are moving on to critical thinking and language. So we're going to be exploring how language works. Why do words have the meanings that they have? What power do words have, and why do they have that power? Is language arbitrary? Should we be offended by words? We're going to be thinking about things like connotation and denotation. So denotation is the dictionary definition of a word, and connotation is the culturally accepted definition of a word. So to give you an example of what I mean by that, if I say it's cool in my house, do I mean the temperature, or do I mean it's cool, like it's a good vibe in here? It depends, right? So language is weird like that. Words can have different meanings and cultural meanings and meanings for different social groups, and all of those things can be confused. And so this week's lesson is very much about how language works, how we effectively communicate, and how we need to think critically about our words and also our nonverbal language. So our work for the week includes the language discussion. So this discussion asks you to read a New York Times article about one man's use of a certain word, which certainly sounds controversial, but may in fact not actually be. The discussion is going to ask you to respond to a couple of questions concerning the article, and then, as always, I would ask that your responses be of some length and be well developed, well written, and that you post a few replies to your classmates to continue the conversation in order to receive full credit. This discussion is going to run from Wednesday the 25th through Sunday the 29th. Now, this is an important part. I made a few announcements and posts about this yesterday. Your first posts for this discussion need to be made by Friday the 27th. So that is one day sooner than our last discussions. The previous discussions, your first posts had to be in by Saturday. From now on, they're going to need to be in by Friday. Your first posts will need to be in by the Friday of each week. That way we have a little bit more time. We have the weekend essentially to reply to each other and get a little bit better conversation going. So again, please make sure your first posts for the language discussion are in this week by Friday the 27th. I've also posted a link to a presentation, a little Prezi, to help you with the discussion, just to give you a little bit more of insight into the ideas, get your brains thinking about the stuff that we're going to be discussing in this presentation or in this discussion. Our other work for the week is the Nonverbal Language Assignment. This is due on Sunday the 29th, but you can turn it in for a preview by Wednesday the 25th. Anyone that doesn't know, a preview basically means you submit the assignment as you would if you were turning it in for real. And then within 48 hours from Wednesday the 25th, I will review it, comment on it, pretty much grade it just like I would any normal assignment, and then give it back to you. And then you have an opportunity to make those changes, improve upon it, and turn it back in and improve your grade. So it's a great opportunity. If you have the time, I strongly recommend you take advantage of the previews. So I want to talk about this assignment. The Nonverbal Language Assignment is our first essay-style assignment in this class. The essay prompt is going to ask you to consider the Scott Peterson trial, in which Scott Peterson was convicted of murdering his wife and unborn child, despite the fact that there was really limited evidence connecting him to the crime. So instead, Peterson was seemingly found guilty largely due to his body language. In the courtroom, he was stoic and unremorseful. He kind of looked a little crazy, a little detached from the whole thing. He certainly didn't seem like a husband and father in mourning. But this brings up some interesting questions or problems. Who is to say what is or is not an appropriate emotional response to a traumatic event? Pretend for a minute that he's innocent and he was emotionally blank. He was in shock of some sort, and he was sentenced because of that. Do all people communicate their nonverbal language in the same way? What makes an average juror an expert on reading someone else's nonverbal language? What makes any of us an expert on these sort of things? I'm sure you've personally had moments where someone says, "Oh, you look angry. Are you okay?" And you are perfectly fine. These things happen, right? Ultimately, these lead to some bigger questions, like, are innocent people being found guilty because they, quote unquote, looked like they committed the crime? And on the opposite end, are guilty people being found innocent because they looked innocent? So the main question you need to answer is, should juries be allowed to see the defendants during a court case, or should the defendants be kept isolated somehow and the court case just play out with lawyers and exhibits and being shown to the jury? So, to approach writing this, I strongly suggest that you review the full assignment prompt closely. There is the main question that you need to answer: should juries be allowed to see defendants during a court case? But there are also several smaller questions within the prompt, and each one of those needs to be answered in order for you to receive full credit. And those answers for those questions need to be thought out and developed. I'm not going to give you full credit because you wrote one sentence to answer them, okay? So these smaller questions that you need to consider are the following, okay? Number one, the language games that are played in a courtroom, including nonverbal language games. So what language games are going on in a courtroom and how do they play out? Two, what manipulative elements may be present in verbal and nonverbal language games? So how can language be manipulated in a courtroom? Think about the way that lawyers can twist around questions, or the way that one sentence can be said many different ways and mean many different things. We all probably have that sarcastic friend who can take a sentence like, "Yeah, that movie's real cool," and turn it into, "Yeah, that movie's real cool," right? You should also consider the goals of the defense versus the prosecution and how each might use language accordingly. And then finally, consider different rhetorical tools. By rhetorical tools, I mean things like hyperbole, so extreme exaggeration, euphemisms, dysphemisms, sarcasm, emotive language, persuasive definitions. If you aren't sure about what these things mean, spend a little time researching them, and then think about how those could play out in a courtroom and address these in your paper. So, there is no page or word count minimum for this assignment, but I do expect well-developed answers to each of these questions and to that primary question as well. I would say writing this in less than 3 paragraphs would be a challenge. If I was approaching it, I would probably say writing a 5-paragraph essay. So 3 body paragraphs, an intro, and a conclusion would be a safe bet. You don't have to do that. If you can get all of these things answered in a shorter amount of content and still actually address them effectively, that's fine. If you want to write something longer, if you get into it, go for it. Finally, I just want to provide you with a few writing and grammar tips to help you out. So these are overall things that you should just take with you into any assignment in this class and any writing assignment that you have moving forward. 1, please write your responses in third-person point of view. So first-person point of view is I, me, my. Like, I think Scott Peterson was guilty, or I think the jury should see the defendant. The problem with first-person point of view is that it's too personal. and it's too informal for an academic paper. It's a weird thing writing an academic paper, but your personal opinion isn't really what interests me. What interests me is your ability to think critically about something and maybe even use some research in your paper. So you should be using third person point of view. And then, even more importantly, please, please, please do not use second person point of view. Second person point of view is when you make you your statements, like, you know how it is when someone is guilty. You know the way that their facial expressions change. When you use second person point of view and make you your statements, you're assuming something of your reader. In this case, me. You're assuming that I do know those things. One of my favorite examples as to why second person point of view is not good for academic writing is I had a student a few years ago who wrote a really good paper about something having to do with pregnancy and procedures that could be done. I think it had maybe genetic coding involved in it. But she wrote statements like, you know how when you're pregnant, you feel a certain way. No, I don't. I never will, I don't think. You get my point. So, 2, be sure to write incomplete paragraphs of at least 5 sentences. An academic paragraph should be 5 sentences in length. I'm not going to penalize you, really, if you write me a paragraph that's got 4 sentences, but really, I'm looking for well-developed responses, and that means paragraphs that have some content to them, some meat to them, right? A topic sentence, a concluding sentence, and some actual substance in between. 3, consider the questions carefully. Contemplate counter-arguments and opinions that may differ from your own. There is a tendency with a prompt like this to hear the question, should jurors be allowed to see the defendant? And immediately have your gut reaction, yes or no, and then jump right into your response. The class is called Critical Thinking because I want you to think critically about your responses to things. Why do you feel that way? Why do people feel opposite of you? Consider those possibilities that are different from your initial response. Really put on your thinking caps for this one. And then finally, just review and edit your work. Take 5 minutes when you're done to spell check, grammar check, reread it, maybe have someone else read it. I always feel bad when I have to take off a couple of points for writing mistakes that are clearly just a case of students finishing a paper, hitting save, uploading it, done, without ever checking their work. So that's it for this video. That's it for the things going on this week. If you have any questions about anything that I've discussed here or anything that's going on in the class, or if you're lost or just need help, I'm totally available for you. Just send me an email, shoot me a text. If you are really desperate and you need a phone call, give me a call, leave a message. If I don't answer, I'll get back to you. I, again, would encourage you guys to take advantage of the preview date. If you can't get in the preview date, I'm not gonna penalize you or anything like that. It's just entirely for your benefit. And then finally, please remember that your first posts for the discussion this week need to be in by Friday. That's it. I hope you guys have a good week. I look forward to the work that you're going to give me this week. If you have any other questions with anything, just let me know. Till then, talk to you guys later.